Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. Well, the midterm vote, is on Tuesday night, and we're going to turn to someone who I find one of the more astute followers of politics in the United States, particularly when it comes to the House and particularly when it comes to following progressive candidates all across the country, but not only progressive. So now joining us from Los Angeles is Howie Klein. Howie's a former music producer and record label executive. He was president of Reprise Records from 1989 to 2001. He's a progressive activist noted for his stance against censorship and advocacy of free speech protections. He's now an adjunct professor at McGill University in Montreal, serves on the board of People for the American Way, and blogs under the nom de guerre, Down with Tyranny. Thanks for joining us, Howie.
My pleasure. I like that nom de guerre thing.
Okay, so what are the races you're following, and early in the evening and then later, that one you think are particularly interesting and also may tell us where the evening's going?
So let's take one at a time, because interesting and where the evening's going aren't necessarily the same. But early evening, the first one that we should be watching really closely is Kentucky 6. So that's a race that pits a kind of an interesting candidate on the Democratic side against not one of the worst Republicans, but not necessarily a good Republican. So the Democrat is this woman named Amy McGrath. She's a fighter pilot. She had these great videos come out, and she's okay. She's not going to be Pramila Jayapal or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, but she's not going to be bad. She'll probably be good. In fact, one of her chief advisors is someone who you probably know, Donna Edwards. And, depending on how much sway Donna has with her, the better. And in any case, if she wins that race, that'll be probably the first one that we see come in. If she wins that race, that's the first indication that there will be a very strong wave. That's a very Republican district, and although it's a somewhat tight race, Barr, the Republican, Andy Barr, is favored to win. If she wins it, look for very, very, very good numbers for the Democrats across the country. The next one, similar kind of race, that although more difficult for the Democrats, is in South Carolina. They close their polls a little bit earlier than everybody else does as well. And in the first district, there's an open seat that was formerly held by the ex-governor, Mark Sanford. And he lost the primary to a very, very radical right Trump person, and she is currently favored to win. But there's also a very good Democrat running in this race, a guy named Cunningham. When I say good, I don't mean in this case. I mean a good candidate who's raised money and he's working hard and that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about him ideologically. He's kind of a middle of the road type of Democrat. Not terrible, not wonderful. But if he wins that race, and that's going to come after Amy McGrath, if those two won early in the evening, you can just go to sleep because it's going to be a landslide. Now we're going to get to something interesting. This is not very early, but still early in the evening, Pennsylvania 11. So I think you've been in that district, right?
Yeah, we've been covering it. That's Jess King, who started off about 14 points or even more behind, but now seems to be closing in within the margin of error, which I don't think the national media has picked up on at all.
They have not. And all of their models don't show what she's doing. Their models don't account for what she's doing and how she's running her race. Now, if she wins or even comes close, that means it's not a wave. That means it's a tsunami. That means that there is no Republican anywhere in the country who can be counted as safe. That means there will be districts that no one ever heard of that will be in jeopardy. It means that, do you remember when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won, and there were people running around in the mainstream media and in the punditry and even in the Democratic Party who was, who is she? Those three names, what's that woman? Where is that? They had no idea who she was, where she was. She was, even in New York City, where she won, even the New York Times didn't know who the hell she was. So,
well, they were arguing that once they finally had to acknowledge she won, They were arguing it's a one-off, it's an anomaly. And people might argue Jess King's the same. Like, Jess King is not really running against Trump. She's running against the Republican Smucker, and she's running on a very Sanders-esque campaign. And she's also just a very genuine person who's kind of loved in the district. She comes from Lancaster and so on. Why is she a bellwether if she wins and perhaps not a unique situation?
Well, she's a bellwether because it's such a hard district. It's so red. When the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania redistricted, they got rid of all these gerrymandered districts, most of them became bluer. Her district is one of the only ones that became redder. So it's even worse than it used to be. However, that's the point I was going towards. In a district like hers, and there are many of these districts around the country that look too red early on, the DCCC just doesn't look at them. They stop. So if it's a district that looks like it could really be competitive with the Republicans, then the DCCC will go in and try to wipe out progressives, and they'll do everything they can to make sure a progressive doesn't win. In fact, before the redistricting, Jess had a conservative Democrat backed by the DCCC as her primary opponent. Literally, on the day that the new boundaries came in, Jess King's opponent said, "I'm not running," and the DCCC said, "This district is not winnable," and they went away. So Jess didn't really have a primary opponent. And that is a similar situation around the country. When you start getting districts that are so red that the DCCC ignores them, then you get all these really good progressives who win them because there's no DCCC whispering to donors, don't give them money. They just ignore them. So we have a bunch of good districts, like go down into California, and California 50, down near San Diego, you've got Amar Campa-Najjar. So Amar is the opposite of what the DCCC wants. They didn't want anything to do with him, like literally nothing to do with him whatsoever. They've done everything they can to undermine his campaign. They do that all the time, and they're doing it around the country. But because they didn't care about the district, he beat the conservative who was running against him. The DCCC didn't really, they were rooting for him, but they didn't back him. They didn't do anything about it. So Amar is now the candidate. Well, guess what happened? His opponent, the incumbent, Duncan Hunter, wound up being arrested by the FBI and indicted, and he's out on bail, and Amar could very well beat him. And there are races like that all around the country. There's another one, in fact, in New York, in Buffalo. It's a very, very similar situation where it's in New York 27. It's not in the city of Buffalo, but in the suburbs and exurbs and rural area between Buffalo and Rochester. A big chunk of territory. It's a rather large district. And you've got, it's an R plus 11. So the DCCC says, don't even think about that. Let them do whatever they want there. And we wind up with this guy, Nate McMurray, a Bernie-crat, very, very good, strong, solid candidate running on great issues. And, the DCCC just laughs. They don't care. And then the incumbent, who incidentally was the very first member of Congress to endorse Trump, Chris Collins, he also gets arrested by the FBI, indicted on all sorts of corruption charges, also out on bail. And he's running for Congress out on bail. Once he got arrested, the DCCC suddenly said, "Uh-oh, we better get rid of that Bernie guy and get a real candidate." So they tried to pressure him, but the primary had happened. So they tried to pressure Nate into leaving the race because they had some conservative they wanted to just insert. And Nate told them to go take a walk, and there's nothing they could do about it. And now, Nate has gotten. The last poll showed Nate winning. It wasn't even, a tie. It was already with him ahead. So at that point, the DCCC said, "Ooh, we better, run to the front of the parade here." So they're not spending any money on his behalf, but they are now saying that they're for him, whatever that means. But anyway, like I said, to me, these are the most interesting districts. The reason that I mention Pennsylvania 11. Is because that's going to come in earlier than these other districts. And so if the three districts that we talked about, Kentucky 6, and South Carolina 1, and Pennsylvania 11. If the Democrats early in the evening won all three of those districts, it is just a wipeout. It is going to be the most historic wipeout in the history of Congress. The Republicans will lose, I don't know, over 70 seats.
What do you think in Iowa's 4th? Is that going to be?
I think that's another one. You went right to another district. That's exactly what I just described. Exactly the same thing. The DCCC had no interest. They don't care. Iowa has 4 districts now. So one of them is held by a Democrat. So let's leave that one aside. He's not being challenged seriously. He's in. So there are 3 red seats. The makeup of the Iowa congressional delegation is 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat. We're looking at a possibility for 4 Democrats and no Republicans. And that would take Steve King being defeated by J.D. Scholten in the 4th district. Can that happen? The new polling certainly shows it can happen. No one expects it. If we are indeed having a nice strong wave, which would be indicated earlier in the evening by those 3 districts, Scholten wins and probably wins in a not insignificant way. He probably wins well, which is what I'm hoping and expecting to see. As you know, I run a progressive PAC, and our PAC has been backing Scholten. Our PAC has been backing Jess King. Those are our kind of candidates. These are progressive candidates who are more or less running on a Bernie type platform.
And in Pennsylvania, there's some other races that are looking like there might be Democrats winning, or Republicans might have been expected to. There's the Wallace running. What do you make of that? I talked to Wallace early on in the race. I was excited because of who his grandfather was. So the grandfather was the Roosevelt's vice president.
The good Roosevelt vice president, who was kicked out of the vice president's nomination because they felt he was too far to the left. It's a shame because he was Roosevelt's best guy. And so I was so excited about him that I called Scott Wallace to talk to him, and I found him to be okay. I didn't find him to be what I was hoping him to be in terms of like someone who would be the right kind of person to be endorsed by Blue America, my PAC. But he's good. He's not bad.
And I hear it's neck and neck. We're in the race.
He's ahead. He's probably going to win that race. If we don't win districts like that, it's going to be really, really tough night for Democrats. So I think Scott Wallace will win. One of the things about a race like that sort of gets me down a little bit is that he's very, very wealthy, and he's put millions of his own dollars into the race, and that's the kind of thing that I think is harmful to democracy in a general way, and I don't like seeing it on either side of the aisle. I hate it when Republicans do it, and I equally hate it when Democrats do it, when they self-finance campaigns, literally spending millions of dollars, not even $1 million, but millions of dollars.
Apparently, according to Ad Age, the top gubernatorial and top 10 gubernatorial and Senate races, just the top 10, will have spent about $1 billion in advertising in these midterms. That's only 10 races.
Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable. I mean, at this point, there's got to be some kind, and that's one of the things that I'm hoping eventually Democrats will do. I mean, Nancy Pelosi, when she announced her 3 main goals for when they win, one of them actually was addressing this incredibly corruptible system of campaign finance. We'll see if there can be anything done about that. While Trump is president, it's going to be very, very hard. But the idea is that the Democrats win the House now. In 2020, they take the presidency and the Senate, and then the Democrats can do some real things, and that's going to be a matter of what they decide to prioritize.
And if all these progressives actually do get elected, that will be a whole nother front of struggle. Just what will happen in that House? Will the progressives assert themselves, or allow corporate Dems to continue running the show there. Howie, let's pick up that conversation in a separate segment. Thanks very much for joining us on this, and we'll pick up the conversation on what might happen in the House if the Dems do win in part 2 of this.
Okay, I'll look forward to it.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.